Hi, and welcome back to the EMJ Gold podcast, brought to you by EMJ, your number one open access destination for HCPs and pharma globally. Now, for those of you on video, you'll see that I am all alone this week. Jade is actually halfway across the world in South Korea, lucky her, so it's just going to be me for this episode. In store today, well, I have a really exciting interview. If you listened to last week's episode, you will have heard that we're going to be talking about women's health, and that is exactly what the interview is on today. This is an issue that affects 50% of the population, and it really doesn't get enough attention, so very keen to get into the topic with today's guest. So joining me to shed some light on the topic is Nichole Davies. She is a women's health enthusiast and Chief Strategy Officer at VML. She has over 20 years of experience in the healthcare industry. She leads the strategic disciplines and teams for the entire VML Health network globally, so hugely experienced. And she has experience across oncology, rare diseases, respiratory, diabetes, and of course women's health. And she's worked with a number of companies, including AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Lilly, Sanofi, and many more. So she is very experienced with understanding how pharma can really make a difference on this issue. In the interview, we reflect on the good, the bad, and the ugly in women's health, so I hope you enjoy and maybe even learn a thing or two. So without further ado, I will leave you to it and enjoy the interview. So Nichole, welcome to the podcast. It's lovely to have you on today. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to talk all things women's health.
Absolutely. So we've been put in touch as this is a subject that's close to both of our hearts, something we're really interested in. And today we're going to be talking about the issue at hand, but also how things are changing for the better. We're going to be putting a bit of a positive spin on the situation and looking at the people that are making moves in this area. But I thought we could start, Nichole, with looking at the issue at hand and looking at why things need to change. And I know some of my listeners will be very aware of this issue, but some people may not know some of the facts. So a couple of things that I've sort of come across in my time looking over this topic. Women live longer, but in poorer health.
Yes.
Women are more likely to seek out medical treatment, but are more likely to be misdiagnosed. Mm-hmm. And finally, women's specific health conditions typically are underfunded, so they're receiving just 4% of R&D funding that are targeted in that area. So you can kind of see in terms of outcomes and investment, there's quite a few disparities here.
Yes.
So Nichole, what's this all about? Why has this been allowed to perpetuate, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's like many, issues with regards to women's health. It's really multifaceted, and it comes from the complexities of areas such as, societal norms and, cultural norms that have prevailed through generations, to the lack of research that you cited into medical health for women, and also implicit biases that we still see, really sort of, front and center in a lot of different healthcare settings in this current year of 2024, which is always quite shocking to me. I think, just taking each one separately, the cultural norms that have sort of surrounded women's health have led to a sort of pretty locked down conversation. I think, from even sort of women's mothers and grandmothers who were always sort of, it's normal, this is what women suffer, this is normal for women, this sort of notion that because we have periods, because we go through menopause, because we have children, these are just the things that we should expect as part of the parcel. And I think that has, really suppressed the ability for women to understand their own normal, and therefore seek out healthcare solutions when they recognize things in their own bodies that are not normal for themselves. So if you take, for example, what is actually a very common healthcare challenge for women around heavy menstrual bleeding, and the statistics vary enormously depending on the source of the data, from 25% to 50% of women who suffer with this. But because there are no standardized tests for heavy menstrual bleeding or understanding in terms of a lexicon of language to help support women recognize when they have heavy menstrual bleeding, that they sort of just think it's part of their normal, cycles, and they don't necessarily seek out the health that they might need in order to get to a better quality of life for themselves, or even understand if it is a symptom for more serious healthcare conditions. So I think the fact that we are women and the natural processes that our bodies go through can oftentimes be a mask for other actions and issues that are coming to bear, and can also create that bias that we see in the healthcare practices around the globe, where women are often dismissed for the pain that they report. Because it's all part of being a woman, and it's not necessarily something to be interrogated further or investigated further. And I think that's why we see such a long path to diagnosis for women with disease such as endometriosis or even ovarian cancer. And actually, if you do look in specifically to oncology, the mortality rates of women are still way higher than that of men. And the prime reason for that is because they're sort of getting to diagnoses a lot later than they should be. And if we could really advance that earlier diagnosis through effective screening and conversation, we would really be able to sort of turn that around for women all around the globe. So I think there are so many factors that really contribute to this issue that are long-standing around taboos, cultural norms. The lack of research into women's specific health is another huge factor there. And as I say, those biases that women sort of encounter when they are ready to seek out help in different shapes and forms.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, ranging from the fact that, women in society, even our offices, are at a temperature that better suits men.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us suffer from the most high burden diseases, such as migraines. But often these are the diseases that are really underfunded and not looked into. So there really is a lot of disparity there, sort of, as you noted very correctly, across the whole system. And I think when I first started learning about this issue, I recently did a roundtable with my team around representation in industry and how getting more people, more women into industry could have benefited this issue, and how perhaps having a more male-dominated industry in the past could have led to this issue.
Yeah.
And I think representation is so important when we look at women's health, because you need that female perspective in there, and you need allies, but you do need women in those positions as well. So I know that we've obviously seen that historically women's health has been perhaps neglected in some ways.
Sure.
But how is the landscape changing? I feel like whenever I go to conferences now, I'm seeing a lot more interest in this subject, sometimes whole stages dedicated to this subject. So clearly momentum is building up.
Thank goodness.
What are we starting to see? Like what started to change? What's made people wake up and take notice of this issue?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think your sort of terminology around neglect is absolutely correct, because women's health has been neglected. There's no other word for it. And I think, again, if you think about, even as you sort of noted with women in the workplace, and how, decades ago, we really saw very small numbers of women in the workplace. And so the workplace was designed for men by men. And as women have sort of grown into the workplace over the last, few decades, we've seen that sort of these issues coming much more to the forefront. I think there's a couple of things that have really spurred on this discussion and conversation that is leading to change, albeit not as fast as many of us would like it to see. As you say, representation is critical. I think, if you look at the pharmaceutical industry, only 25% of women in leadership positions versus, the 50-50 split that, we're seeing in terms of female-male employees. And I think that was a study back in 2018 or 2019. So I'm sure those numbers have hopefully moved into the right place. But even as you see top FTSE 100 reports coming out, and you look at things like the gap in gender pay, And that's sort of fueling the situation, because all of these factors are driving women out of the workplace, especially when they're hitting periods in their lives where, for example, menopause symptoms are making it really, really difficult for them to sort of maintain their pace at work, or those lack of flexible environments to let them sort of carry on with work, but perhaps also serve their own health needs. And I think those types of policies and that type of attention is really needed. And we're starting to see it coming through. And if you ask why, well, the question is really, I think it's quite simple economics. Workplaces need effective women to be successful. And women can be most effective in the workplace when they feel supported. And that support can take many different shapes and sizes, and it's really individual. And I think that's the other thing. We have to stop, looking at things in the sort of broader sense. We have to start thinking about what works for individuals, listening more to women in the workplace around their needs, and sort of implementing procedures and practices that can help them feel more supported in the workplace and stay. And I think COVID really accelerated a lot of this, because we saw such tremendous numbers of women leaving the workforce. It was sort of compounded by the lack of access into healthcare, because all healthcare was consumed with COVID. And so you started to see the rise of a lot of digital health, FemTech types of technology organizations and companies that were helping shine a light on the data, helping shine a light on what have been very suppressed, issues in terms of the conversation that's surrounding, women's health. So if you think about even elements such as fertility and how that can have a huge and enormous impact on women's health and mental health in the workplace, even if you think about, sort of going back to things like heavy menstrual bleeding and how women can maybe not be able to come to work. So all of those things can drive women out of the workplace. And I think, many organizations are starting to wake up to the fact that women represent a really important part of this workforce to, create profitable organizations and drive the economy forward. And we need them. We need women in the workplace. We need it for the health of our families, for the economies. And if we can make the environment in the workplace a lot more flexible for women, I think it will greatly support that endeavor.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. If we've got poor health, how can we contribute to the society in the way that we want to, in the way society really needs us to, as well, exactly, as 51% of the population. You touched on FemTech there. I think there is an amazing group of women who are rising up and coming up with different companies, whether it's to help with menopause, whether it's to help with periods, or whether it's to help with a huge range of female health conditions, not just those related to fertility. I think since 2018, there's been a sort of 28% increase in these investments in these kind of businesses. They're largely driven by female entrepreneurs as well. Obviously, not all women's health conditions can be treated with tech. There is a many that obviously will not be able to be. But how is the rise of these women and these companies pushing the agenda forward? Do you think this is putting it on the radar more of pharmaceutical companies? Are they waking up and being like, okay, well, if we don't do it, they'll do it, and there's definitely value in doing it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there's certainly been a lot more coverage in terms of what we're hearing about FemTech and how it is, a really huge opportunity, as are many areas of women's health, because it has been neglected. To your point there, there is huge opportunity to get into that, disrupt it, and make money, frankly, as well as support women in the process. So everybody wins. I think the femtech market was worth something like a billion, in terms of startups, and it's projected to be something like 75 billion in 2025. So it's definitely a huge growth opportunity for the world economy, right? And I think that in and of itself, helps drive business forward. I know that venture capitalist companies are slowly waking up to the power of female entrepreneurs across the broad spectrum of business, not just in women's health. But I think if you look at the funding and where it's sort of emphasized the most, there's still a huge disparity with regard to funding female founders. And then when you sort of go into FemTech specifically, there's a wealth of opportunity, but they're just not getting the funding that they need. So that's sort of something that really needs to be course corrected. I think that these women are incredibly passionate. They've often lived through these challenges themselves, and they want to advocate for women and make the world a better place. Some of the conversations I've had with some really interesting FemTech founders have talked about just the sort of the notion that bringing, new ways of thinking into the market so that, all tides rise for women is something that's really important to them. But I think, again, just getting them the support they need, whether it's around how do I market my brand, how do I get my sort of story out there to the investment community, how do I sort of bring the business sort of elements forward to make sure that this product or idea is really, gets into the hands of women. These are some of the biggest barriers that they face. But what we are seeing is, as is the case often with women, we create our own communities, and I'm seeing a lot of FemTech type communities coming around with, these women coming together so their voices are louder in support of one another, conferences that are, actually happening, which are purely all about FemTech and understanding the opportunity in women's health. And there is still so much work to do. And actually, when you look at the pharmaceutical industry, there is quite a dearth of sort of activity with regards to, research studies into women's health, or even, necessarily a real appetite in exploring that. The fact is that investors value oncology therapeutics more than they do, therapeutics for women's health, and that's just the way it is, and we have to change that. There are a couple of pharma companies out there, such as Bayer, who have really invested in women's health over the years and are, using their brands as an amplifier to women's voices out there. And I also think the rise of some of our younger generations who are much more comfortable talking about these issues and shining a light on these issues, I think that will also in turn help raise awareness of the work that needs to be done, which will attract investment coming into the future. But it's by really interrogating the experiences that women are having and better understanding and putting funding behind things. So, for example, the Biden administration has just, I think everybody's aware, has just announced an enormous investment into women's health. And so you can see some of these institutions that are really starting to put money where their mouth is. And hopefully that will attract pharma more into this arena to better support women's health as an overall therapeutic area, and advancing the science and advancing the products and solutions that are coming forward for women in their time of need.
Yeah, super interesting. I was actually reading something called the WAM report. I don't know if you've seen this before. Yeah, came across it relatively recently, and there was something in it that said it's not just good science, it's actually a better investment. And that is a sexy bottom line for pharma. They care hugely about patients, but fundamentally, money does need to be made to fund other areas, other innovation. So it makes a lot of sense in many ways. And I think what you highlighted there is really important, that, it does need to be a case of everyone coming together through this issue.
I think just to also add, Isabel, the other sort of huge barrier to pharma getting more invested in this space is reimbursement. We know that many, when you compare, male health conditions in terms of what's reimbursed there to female health conditions, it's an enormous gap, and that's pretty much a global sort of challenge. It's not sort of just in the US or just in the UK. So enabling women to actually get access. And when you obviously look at where health disparities really come into huge numbers and significance when you look at some of those minorities across different global, populations. You look at Black maternity health as an example in the US. I mean, the statistics are getting worse, not getting better. So I think there's a huge policy overhaul that needs to happen with governments coming together to actually help drive the business in the right way. And then there's the responsibility of industry like pharma to help sort of push those doors and have those conversations around how do we improve those reimbursements for female health conditions, and how do we drive forward research and funding in this arena.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Kind of public policy does need to shift, so pharma is coming into a more receptive environment in many ways. I mean, I think a lot of people in the industry are leading the charge in this aspect, but fundamentally the issue is a lot bigger than that.
Yes.
I mean, I remember being completely shocked that the UK had its first women's health strategy.
I know.
I mean, that kind of says
the UK is quite progressed in some of these, but again, it's always the way with women's health. Unfortunately, that word neglect comes back into the frame. But it is positive to see these signs of change that are coming through in recent years. We've just got to build on that momentum and really sort of bring others, and the more we bring into the discussion, the conversation, the greater the impact will be.
What's men's role to play in all of this?
It's a great question. Do you know, I was asking my husband this question, and I think, men get oftentimes terribly uncomfortable when it comes to women can't talk, about their health, and they don't have the right sort of vocabulary to sit down in front of a healthcare professional and drive the right conversation. Healthcare professionals dismiss them, and it drives them further underground. And I think it's sort of replicated in relationships that women have with men as well, be that mother, sister, wife, girlfriend. It doesn't really matter. That absence of the conversation is also means that men can't understand, and men can't help support in the ways that perhaps they'd like to. And I think again, just the overall lifting of these taboos will help. I mean, so I was pontificating on this a while ago, and you think back to when young women first have their period, it's usually the mum who has to have the conversation, or it's mum, and that's understandable because women have these issues and men don't.
Yeah.
But how do we better arm mothers to have those conversations to help drive education at that moment? And likewise for fathers, to also be empowered to have the right conversations. How do we educate men so they can play a healthy role in bringing up the women in their lives, or the relationships that they have with different females in their lives? So I think education and this lift of those cultural norms will help all people sort of better support women's health, whether you're male or female. And I think it's all about normalizing those conversations, these challenges and issues. So I think it's really important for everybody, not just for women.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I read something really interesting which said, and it kind of all goes back to research and how we began in the industry, where the classic symptoms for heart attacks in men are shooting pains down the arm and heart flutters. For women, it's totally different. So women were not being diagnosed with heart attacks when actually they were having them. And this kind of shows you how far back this issue goes. And I think it's not really the fault of the healthcare professional necessarily, because that's the education they're being given, and people aren't empowered to know when a woman is in a specifically bad situation, whether that's with her period or whether that's with the menopause. I think most women don't know, as you say. So if we can get to a point of better empowerment and education, and I'm sure there's a role for the industry to play in that, those that are working within those spaces, to improve that, because yeah, I think healthcare professionals would never want that gap in their knowledge. It's just something that's grown organically.
Yeah, no, I think the roots go really deep across time. I think it was, 18th and 19th centuries that, women's health complaints were called hysteria. If you think about the word hysterectomy, it's all that even the language of health has been, sort of acted as barriers along the way. And I think it was only in recent years that word hysteria was removed from some of the medical literature and education vehicles. But so, yes, there is tremendous work to do. And you cited heart attacks. I think it's something like 50% of women who go misdiagnosed. Same with strokes. 25% women don't get diagnosed with strokes. And it goes on and on. Even as I said earlier, with regards to oncology, I think women have less. It's 2.5 years less life with cancer than men do. But yes, I think that pharma can play a really important role in all of those things. Be it education, be it about bringing services beyond the pill forward, thinking about digital health. How do we track a lot of these things for women? I mean, even something as simple as diagnosing menopause is really challenging. A physician would say, "Oh, do a blood test today and see," but your bloods can look different when you're in menopause from one day to the next. You would have to look at things over a longer period of time to better stand back and understand the patterns, and look at what's potentially happening. So, the role that digital health can play in, tracking data and having women sort of better understanding on a day-to-day basis, what is the symptomology? How are they feeling? Oh, tonight I had a night sweat. Let's catalog that. And then going into having much more armed, evidence-based conversations with physicians, starts to help them better understand the picture as well. So I just think there's an enormous role around communication tools and access that pharma can play to help support women better in this area.
Yeah, you're so right to bring up digital health. I think there is so much interesting stuff going on there. And I love what you said about it enables you to gather that evidence. You have the full picture. You can understand yourself so you can help someone else understand fundamentally, which does seem to be the issue often. We've spoken a lot about the challenge and what we're going through, but also I think there is a lot of positives that we're experiencing at the moment as well with FemTech, with the rise of digital health, with more companies saying that they are going to invest in this area. And obviously the changes in public policy are great. We'll have to see what happens with those over time. But if you were to sort of put on your crystal ball and your thinking cap and your hopeful eye, how do you hope women of the future will experience their health journeys differently to how they've experienced them perhaps in the past or even now?
I think at the very minimum, I would wish and do hope and have a lot of positivity towards just better education overall. I think social media can play a fantastic role in helping reach women in the ways that they are looking to connect, things like influencer strategy, things that bringing influencers forward and reaching women in ways that perhaps, we haven't in the past. I think that then opens the door to education. But I think it's in the younger generation, but it's all the way through the generations of women. I truly see education as being much more accessible. And I think that will just continue to rise. Of course, what comes with that is almost too much information, and I think we're almost at that place where how do you trust what information is coming from where and from whom? Who are the authorities in women's health? And I think that platform is largely unclaimed at the moment. So that's a really nice opportunity. Companies like the Mayo Clinic, who already have tremendous perception among society as being leading health educators, I think those types of institutions have an enormous opportunity. So I think at the very least, empowering women to be more educated, lifting those taboos so that they feel they have permission to better understand their bodies and what's right for them and what isn't. I also do see, with AI, I know everybody's talking about AI, it's a bit of a saturated conversation, but we know we've only just begun in understanding how we can leverage AI to really advance some of those gaps we've talked about today. And I think, that represents tremendous opportunity in terms of, research, in terms of fueling better understanding, in terms of educating health practitioners. The data will also help support a general better understanding in society of women's health. I think that will continue to accelerate, whether that's data that's gleaned from more traditional research studies that we expect from pharma, or from some of those digital tools that we talked about, or hopefully it'll be an amalgamation of both. So I can see the future is bright in that regard. I do think that there is a need for women, as is the case in many of the challenges we've experienced over the centuries, to keep on advocating. More women in leadership positions will really help the conversations to go further and to get stronger. So again, it's almost like a full cycle. How do we invest in women in the workplace, drive leadership forward so that they can clear paths before that weren't sort of cleared in perhaps for themselves or for others around them. And I do think when you hear, I could hear literally the collective screams of joy from women all over the world when those huge funding promises were made by Jill Biden, and 100 million coming into investment. It's those are the things that are really going to help us move the needle, because that investment will help bring others in to invest, and then hopefully this will become a momentum that we can really sort of leverage and grow over time.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It is a very cyclical issue. Every part of the problem relates to the other, but I think we are seeing huge amounts of progress in every area. And well, let's hope the future is bright for women's health. Nichole, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been lovely to chat to you. You are so knowledgeable on all things in this area. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for giving me a chance to, have a good chat about this. I could talk about women's health all day, so it's been a real pleasure.
It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Isabel. Take care. Bye for now.
Many thanks to Nichole for joining us for that episode. I particularly enjoyed what she was saying about making sure that women are educated to be able to advocate for themselves in the healthcare setting. As we heard towards the end there, it really is a cyclical issue. So starting at the root and educating women while they're still young will surely be a way to see improvement. But I'm afraid that is all we have time for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. It means a lot to us. And please do subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. But until then, it's bye from me. Take care.